onto this conversation now. Trusts can be an effective tool for individuals looking to create and protect their legacy for the future. But how much do South Africans know about them, except that it can be a very expensive exercise? The same can be said for community trusts that hold the community's equity share in a local company, such as a mining operation or renewable energy plant. And for more on this, I am joined by Israel Noko, the CEO at TrustFirst and social investment specialist at Tshikululu Investments. That's Graeme Wilkinson. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us. Israel, I think let's start the conversation with you. If you could help us understand exactly what a trust is and why South Africans should consider setting one up to build or to protect their legacy.
Good evening, Tukoza, and to all the viewers this evening. So in general, a trust is basically a legal instrument whereby individuals or companies or any other, persons are able to put assets into an entity, and that entity ultimately will then be held under the custodianships of trustees. So what you effectively have is that you have an agreement, and trusts are private agreements between the founder and then the trustees. And ultimately, that is there to be serving the interests of beneficiaries. So trusts, for many years have been a very wonderful way to ensure that anyone that wishes to pass on either wealth or any specific assets to a defined class of individuals, whether that be family members or specific communities, can do so by way of an agreement. And once that agreement has been put in place, then it is up to the trustees to oversee that those wishes are ultimately then fulfilled. So ultimately what we're talking about is we're talking about a private agreement, which is very, very different from a will. A will is basically a testimony of last wishes, whereas a trust is basically removing assets from one individual or entity into the hands of trustees and ultimately under the custodianship of them for the interests of beneficiaries. So for many years, trusts have been used as far back, going back to the 1400s, as a way of ensuring that those assets are ultimately serving the interests of beneficiaries.
Yeah, Israel, and we'll get into why South Africans should consider a trust and why it's not as inaccessible as many people may think. Graeme, let's bring you in here. You deal largely with community trusts. Explain how they work. Do they work the same way Israel is describing? And what are some of the bottlenecks that would see then community trusts not work? But where are we also seeing some of the success stories?
Well, thank you. That's a great question, and I'm not too sure where to start. I guess at the very beginning, which is Israel's explanation of a trust is spot on, and it as applicable with regards to individuals as it would be when the end beneficiaries are a whole community. What we see in South Africa is there's been a plethora of community trusts that have been established, driven largely by the need by a company, in this case, the founders of most of these community trusts that we're seeing in South Africa now are corporates, whether they're a mining company or a renewable energy company. They are some of the ones that we see most because they're so highly regulated, and they're, in terms of their broad-based Black economic empowerment codes and regulations, they need to demonstrate that the community where they operate, whether it's a mine or a renewable energy company, has a stake in that company. So they have taken assets, as Israel has said. So a mining company will take some assets, in this case, a few percentage of their shares, maybe 2.5% or 5% of the shares in that company, and donated them to a trust, appointed trustees to look after this asset, but for the expressed benefit of the beneficiaries, who would be the community where the mine is located. Originally, it was there was an understanding that they would look at the community that was in a 50-kilometer radius of the mine, and anybody that fell within that. Nowadays, there's a lot more of appreciation for a little bit more nuance, because sometimes a mine might draw its labor from somewhere else. It might be that they're just in an agreement that anybody who lives in that municipality would become a beneficiary of this mined community trust. Similarly, we've seen a lot of that happening with the renewable energy companies, where a renewable energy plant, be it a solar power plant or a wind farm, also donates a certain percentage of shares in that plant to a trust and has a group of trustees that then make sure that whatever benefit comes out of holding those shares, so the dividend flows mostly, are then given to the benefit of beneficiaries.
Yeah.
In terms of successes and failures, sure, it's such a range. We've got a lot of very small trusts, and they struggle. The overheads that there are fixed overheads to some degree, and perhaps Israel best placed to talk to that. But some trusts, just to get a trust off the ground, there are some standard costs that you need to have to keep a trust running.
Yeah.
And some of the community trusts are, especially those that, in our experience, those that are linked to a small renewable energy plant, maybe a solar power farm out in the middle of the Northern Cape, and they have income of maybe 2 million rand a year, they really struggle just to keep the trust's head above water, so to speak, to make sure they can cover their costs, and then whatever's left over, they're then able to make as contributions to the community.
Yeah.
And then you have other trusts that are huge and have 120 million rand a year to invest in the community. And for them, being able to keep their costs under the limit of 15% is quite easy, because, of course, 15% of 120 million is a lot different to 15% of 4 million. So those are just very high level, and there's a lot more detail we could get into.
Yeah. Well, Graeme, I wish I had that 120 million to protect my legacy. But Israel, maybe to bring you back in here, how much does someone need to earn or need to be worth to even consider having a trust? As Graeme said, there are some costs to setting up a trust. So would someone like myself qualify to be able to set up a trust? What kind of South African household should actually consider setting up a trust?
So, in my humble opinion, I think a trust is affordable to most South Africans. If you've got a property, if you've got a business, if you've got a little bit of savings, particularly if you're thinking about the next generation. So, family members that you want to pass on to could be your children, or maybe it could be your parents. So the reason why I'm saying it's affordable for everybody is that, SARS makes it possible that if you've got an asset base that is under 3.5 million rands, then you get a tax, relief on that. So it's called what we call an abatement. And what that allows you then to do is that you can transfer those specific assets into a trust on the event of a death, tax-free. And once you've done that, then the trust can then fulfill its functions in serving the interests of the founder and ultimately the needs of beneficiaries. But one of the things that you have raised, which is about the difficulty in managing a trust, is that often people think that, when you're setting up a trust, that you are setting up an extension of yourself. And this is where, one of the errors starts to creep in. And what we refer to as an alter ego, is then classified by that. So it's really important that South Africans remember that the moment you transfer an asset from one legal person or an entity into a trust, you actually are removing control of that asset into the hands of trustees.
Yeah.
So it's really important that the compliance of the trust is kept up to date. And since South Africa's grey listings, there's been a lot more scrutiny on trusts now. Trustees now are fulfilled and obligated to make sure that they are reporting on beneficial ownerships, that they do submit annual financial statements every year, that they do make sure that it has a tax number, a bank account, and all these compliance touch points. So it's really important that the trustees have a full understanding of their fiduciary responsibilities when they take on looking after assets under trust. Now, it becomes even more in the case of community trusts. You see, and often what we find is that community, trustees are people that don't actually understand their fiduciary duties. And I think this is where Wonderful entities like Tshikululu Social Investments play a vital role in educating trustees on their fiduciary responsibilities.
Absolutely, and I think that was my follow-up question for Graeme Israel is, are then trustees in the community trust, because these are then normal South Africans in the communities where a mining company is operating or a renewable energy plant is being set up, are they being empowered to understand how trusts work and their roles and responsibilities in ensuring that that trust is successful and actually builds on that legacy for people in that community for years to come?
It's such a good question. And my short answer is no, not enough. There's a lot more work that needs to be done. And one of the things that I think many are struggling with is, given the way that these community trusts are structured and also the way they're introduced to the community, is there's a sense that it might be some kind of a democratic or representative structure. And I think Israel would agree with me that a trust is not a democracy.
Yes.
That you have to make sure you've got the right people appointed as trustees, because the success of the trust really does rest very largely on the caliber of person that you then have as a trustee.
Yeah.
But you do want to have community representatives. You can't have, I mean, you can appoint somebody in Cape Town and somebody in Phalaborwa to run your trust in the Northern Cape, and they can do it legally, but as far as the community is concerned, they obviously would like to see someone they know and they trust sitting on that board of trustees. And of course, for the trust to really be effective in driving impact, which is, what from Tshikululu's perspective is the reason the trust is there, is to drive a change in the lives of the beneficiaries over time. You really do need trustees who've got a mind for that. And yes, you try and find a legal person who can sit on the trust and a finance person and maybe somebody from a faith-based organization and a chieftaincy if you have traditional leaders in the area, to bring balance and a skill set. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done to assist community trusts. And I know organizations like, interestingly, the IDC, who, because they've invested in so many different renewable energy companies, have got so many trusts associated.
Yeah.
Actually doing quite a lot. And we were very fortunate to work with them on a workshop recently to provide additional insights and experience and guidance for those people who are entrusted with the governance of these assets on behalf of the community.
Absolutely. Well, Graeme Israel, unfortunately, we have run out of time, but I think there is value in us having this conversation and really unpacking those community trusts, and as well for individuals and some of the compliance issues to help South African understand. Thank you so much for your time this evening.